Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Kirstin Schell's webinar, Power Foods You Need in Your Diet. My name is Jason Gould and I work for canfitpro in the Education Department. I just wanted to let you know a few details before we start today. First, Kirstin will be taking all of your questions following her presentation. If you think of a question during the presentation, just write it in the panel on your screen and Kirstin will be able to answer it at the end of the presentation. Second, if you would like to earn CECs for attending this webinar, there will be a quiz available to you by next Monday through your canfitpro member portal on canfitpro Interactive. As well, within a week, a recorded copy of the webinar will be available on canfitpro Interactive as well as on the canfitpro YouTube channel. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's presentation, we encourage you to register for canfitpro Toronto Conference on August 6th to 10th to see Kirstin present 2 more sessions on the Saturday of the conference. The deadline to register is Friday, July 25th. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Kirstin. Kirstin is a personal training project manager and instructor for GoodLife Fitness, where she began her career 14 years ago. Nutrition became a passion early in her career as she saw firsthand its impact on the wellness, results, and vitality of her clients. Kirstin now runs a successful nutrition consulting practice in Montreal and co-authored the canfitpro Nutrition and Weight Loss Certification Manual that launched in 2013. Based on her extensive personal training and group exercise education and experience, Kirstin is a sought-after instructor and presenter. I hope you all enjoy the webinar today. Thanks.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on what might be a beautiful day where you are. It certainly is here in Montreal. And today we're going to talk about what I think is an interesting topic and one that's really relevant to when we talk about nutrition, and that is superfoods. So what are some superfoods that are out there? Now, I believe you probably have a pretty good sense of some superfoods, ones that you regularly include in your diet and that you recommend to all your personal training clients or group exercise clientele, but we're just going to cover them in a little bit more depth today. I've chosen some of these superfoods, some because they're just too good to ignore, and some I've included because I find they're not maybe given the attention they need to be given, and some because they've actually been vilified, and I feel they actually have a place within a healthy nutrition plan. So we're going to cover all those things. As Jason mentioned, I will go through the presentation, but I will allow for some time at the end for questions, and I will also see them pop up here. All right, so thank you for your patience in that matter. Hopefully you can see my slides as we go through this today, and we're going to dive right in because an hour goes pretty quick. There's many, many foods to discuss. Okay. So and my slide is not changing. Perfect, there we go. So things we need to consider before we talk about which foods are in fact superfoods is that our usage of the vitamins and minerals in superfoods is only as good as our digestion allows. So some of these foods obviously will not be perfect for all people, for intolerances they may have, allergies they may have, certain tastes and preferences they may have, or even religious beliefs or ethical beliefs that they may have. So I've presented the foods kind of not taking into consideration those things, but it's also really important to mention that not everyone will succeed on the exact same diet plan or nutrition plan due to these variances. So you always want to keep that in mind with yourself and with your own clients. Of course, the nutrient timing is also a factor to keep in mind. The scope of this 1 hour we have together doesn't really allow for us to dive a lot into nutrient timing in terms of what is the best timing for specific macronutrients or even micronutrients. But that is the next level of considering some of these foods and when they are. So if it's something that you're really passionate about, it would be something for you to investigate a little bit more. Okay. So what is the purpose today? So when we talk about superfoods, and we often in the world talk about things we don't want to eat. So I see, a lot of social media, a lot of things that don't eat this and don't eat this. But I feel that if we discuss the positive attributes of superfoods, we can put this all into a very positive context. The more we fill our day and our meals with superfoods, the less room there is for unhealthy things. We also know that when the body is well nourished, it tends to crave bad food. We'll put a label on it, bad food, less. So if we focus on getting in the good, automatically we start decreasing or eliminating the bad. So it's just putting a positive spin on similar information. So just keep that in mind today. So the first nutrient or type of food we're going to talk about are the omega-3s. And I'm sure this is not surprising anyone that this is up here on the screen for you today. So why do we need omega-3s? Well, I'm sure you guys have a few good answers that are popping up into your mind right now, but let's review quickly. The main one is for reduced inflammation. So it has an anti-inflammatory effect, and that is widespread. So when we think about inflammation, we often think about it in an acute sense. So for example, you fall and twist your ankle swells up. That is in fact inflammation in the acute sense. However, when we talk about overall health and wellness, we're talking about systemic inflammation a lot. And that's inflammation that we can't see with our eyes necessarily, but it's inside the body. And more studies and research are coming out indicating that this systemic widespread inflammation really is a huge part of why we experience heart disease, diabetes, cancers. It's really being linked into all these major diseases. So it's really important that we work continually on our body being in an anti-inflammatory state. And omega-3s are very, very good at performing this role. We also know that in relation to that, omega-3s have been shown to decrease the chance of stroke, of Alzheimer's, of different cancers and heart diseases. So there certainly is a lot to say for omega-3s. In respect to the types, omega-3s, easy to remember, there are 3 types of omega-3s we're going to talk about. The major ones that come from animal sources are our DHA and our EPA, and they are best obtained directly from food because our body doesn't make them. The other one is called ALA, and we often find ALA in things like flax and chia and very, very healthy foods, but it is really important to mention that ALA isn't used directly by the body. The body takes the intake of ALA and it has to convert it to the DHA and EPA sources. Now, what unfortunately is the reality is we know the conversion rate of ALA is actually quite low. In fact, estimates indicate that it's as low as 5%. Okay, so it is important to keep that in mind, particularly for those of yourselves or those of you who have clients who you know are either vegetarian or vegan. You need to keep in mind the conversion rate of our ALA omega-3 sources. Okay, so where, in fact, do we get these foods? Well, I just gave you a little hint there, animal-based stuff. So in terms of our DHA and our EPA, ideally we're getting it from wild cold water fish. So examples of that would be wild salmon. Now, you'll notice that I made a very important distinction that we do not want to rely on Atlantic salmon, farmed salmon for omega-3 purposes. And I would love to throw this question out, although I know you guys are on mute mode. This is usually when I see who wants to answer this question, but I'm just going to answer it for you right now. And there's a big difference between a wild-caught salmon and a farmed salmon. So in the wild, salmon, as we know, has that pink, reddy color. And that's not because the fish is inherently pink. It's because it eats its nutrients from the sea that, in fact, make it pink. Okay, so really important to keep that in mind. Without that, it's actually a gray color. When it eats those sea vegetables, that is what gives it its omega-3 content and makes it pink. So if you were to go into an area where there's farm salmon being raised, you would notice it's actually not pink. It's gray because it's not eating the krill. So the krill being what gives it the omega-3 content and gives it the color. Without the krill, the fish is actually gray. But you might be thinking to yourself, but when I buy it, it's not gray. That's because there's food coloring given to the fish. Usually it's given to them in their feed. And that's what gives them the pink color. So deceiving, however, what they don't get along with that are the corresponding omega-3s. So if we're relying upon a farmed fish for our omega-3, we're actually cheating our bodies out of these essential nutrients. It's also pretty important to mention that in these farmed fish, the feed is not of the wild sort. So they are being given things that they know will make the fish fat. So they're being given soy. They're given fatty things to fatten them up faster, aren't necessarily healthier. And of course, because there's lots of fish in a very small area, diseases run rampant, so there's other stuff being given to prevent illness. So for many, many reasons, we could talk about this for quite some time. I'll try to keep it pretty simple. We really want to focus your efforts on the wild salmon. Is it more expensive? Yes, it is. Is it well worth it? Absolutely. So when you're eating this a couple times a week, you're getting a good dose of DHA and EPA, in addition to which you're getting potassium, selenium, B12, so many, many vital and very important nutrients. Now, you don't have to solely rely on salmon. There's also sardines, which I wish I liked. I've tried. I just can't do it. But for those who love sardines, power to you, because they are certainly one of the top healthiest foods around, in my opinion. Full of calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, zinc, copper, B vitamins, you name it. So an absolutely fantastic addition to the diet. Because it's such a small fish, they're not usually overproduced. They're usually very low in toxins. So it's just an excellent addition to anyone's nutritional plan. The next one I want to talk about in terms of this fish family and the rich vitamins here is the cod and the cod liver oil. My favorite actually being fermented cod liver oil, even higher in vitamins A and D as well as omega-3s. So these are also great additions to the diet. Right. So let's move on. We haven't explored all of the omega-3 sources. As I mentioned, there is the ALA form as well, which we're largely looking at flaxseed, chia, salba, and even some algae, which also have some DHA. Now, as I mentioned, the conversion rate into the EPA DHA is lower. However, flax has its own reason for being on this list. It is full of lignans, and those are known as cancer fighters. They have an extreme amount, one of the highest amounts in the entire world of a naturally found food. So even though they might not be your sole source of omega-3s, I highly encourage you to include flax into your diet for the lignans. Now, when eating flax, and I find it's one of those superfoods that's certainly been caught on to by marketing. There's all kinds of granola bars and all kinds of foods out there that like to promote that they're full of flax. And when you open them up, you see that there's some flax seeds sprinkled on the top of this sugar-loaded bar. So don't fall into that trap, please. And please note that flax, to be utilized by the body, does need to be ground. So a whole flax seed largely will go through your system unabsorbed and unutilized. So you can do the math on that one. You can figure out where it ends up, okay? But the body doesn't use a whole lot of it. So you want to ensure that when you're using the flax that you're grinding it up, okay? So you can do that. You can buy them ground or you can do it yourself. Obviously, it's cheaper to do it yourself. I find a coffee grinder works wonderfully well for this purpose. Now, there's one more place that omega-3s exist. It's going to come up a little later, but I do want to mention it now. It kind of falls into two categories, and that is in humanely raised and properly fed animal products beyond the fish category. So if you're looking at a grass-fed cow and the products that come from that animal, you are also looking at higher omega-3 content. Now, why is that, of course? Because they are, in fact, eating grass, grass being rich in omega-3s. So if you're buying organic grass-fed beef, if you're buying organic grass-fed butter, you are absolutely getting a very respectable amount of omega-3s from those food sources as well. So really important to keep that in mind. And that is why ultimately we're seeing kind of a deficiency in omega-3 now that didn't exist before, because we simply are not getting the same amount of omega-3s we naturally got years ago. We're also throwing off the balance of our omega-3s by consuming way too many omega-6s. And that is in of itself a pretty big topic, which we won't be able to explore in depth today. But you do absolutely need to keep your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in mind, because when the omega-6s get too high, you're back into an inflammatory state. And if you remember, one of the major reasons why we want to get our omega-3 intake up is for the anti-inflammatory effect. Okay. So wish I had you to ask if you had questions. I'm going to keep going for now. And we're moving into some more good fats. So coming off the omega-3 being a very healthy polyunsaturated fat, now we're into some additional healthy fats. And you might notice the first couple on the list here are ones that are a little bit controversial. The first one being coconut oil. And the reason this one is controversial, now I find this is, within the past couple of years, has really received quite a big boost. I've been consuming it for a few more years than that. But coconut oil has been given a bad name because it is very saturated. In fact, coconut oil is 92% saturated fat. So those who, of course, feel that saturated fat leads to heart disease and increased cholesterol, understandably, they're giving it the big ixnay, do not consume coconut oil. However, we know that studies are showing now that saturated fats and cholesterol do not lead to heart disease, particularly when they're from such an incredible source as is coconut oil. So you'll see here MCFA, and that is short for medium-chain fatty acids, which we know are absorbed and utilized by the body much more efficiently. So a great energy source for the body. Also very high in lauric acid, which is antimicrobial. We also know that coconut oil is antiviral and antifungal. So this is really a superfood, no doubt about it. I also feel it tastes incredible. Not everyone loves coconut, but certainly if you like the taste of coconut, then it's tough to stay away from this stuff because it's just so delicious. I've also included red palm fruit oil here because of its incredibly high levels of carotene, vitamin E, and vitamin Q10. So a fairly strong flavor, but these, because they have a higher saturated fat content, can be used at higher temperatures. So we can actually do some cooking with these oils, which I will differentiate from some others that are on the list a little bit lower down. So keep in mind that the more saturated the fat you're using, the higher the smoke point, so the higher heat tolerance it has. And that's what I find a little bit scary these days, is that we're using some very unstable fats to cook with. And that's unfortunate because it's making them toxic, it's making them rancid, we're breaking down anything good that might be in them. So again, the quick way to remember it is the more saturated, the higher heat resistance, the less saturated, the lower heat resistance. So I'll get to those lower heat resistant oils in a moment, but right now we're going to fall into the mid bracket, and that is olive oil. So olive oil definitely has its place. The only thing I find with olive oil, unfortunately, is that some people are using it exclusively. So they're not branching out to get variety of fat sources. But in and of itself, olive oil is high quality if you are buying a pure source of it. There's lots of stories out there now because it's so marketable. They're trying to get it out there cheaper. So they're mixing the oils with other cheaper types of oils, mislabeling it even. So what you want to look for when you're buying your olive oil is that it's the first cold press extra virgin, which means that it's being cold pressed. So it's a mechanical press. They're literally squeezing the olives as opposed to extracting the oil chemically. Very big difference. And you want the first press because that's the best quality oil. It's the oil that comes out of that first squeezing of the olives. Okay? I actually just got back from a trip to Italy where I got to taste some of the most delicious olive oils I ever have in my life. So if you have a chance to go there, then stock up. But we can get really good quality olive oils here as well. Okay? Also high in omega-9, which we know is very, very good for heart health. So definitely one to include in the diet. What is important to note with olive oil is that it's kind of in the middle ground of terms of heat tolerance, which means that you don't want to cook at extremely high temperatures with olive oil. You can add a little bit of heat to it, but it's best used at the end of the cooking process, a drizzling, low heat. So you don't want to be frying or going high heat searing with olive oil because that's breaking down some of the components of it. So monounsaturated fats being the main proponent of olive oil. Now, how do you know the difference between the saturated level of all these fats and oils that we're talking about? So it really is how solid the oil is at either room and in the fridge. So you'll notice that any saturated fat, as you see the picture here at the bottom left of the coconut oil, that's at room temperature and it's solid. Okay? So that it would indicate a high level of saturated fat. Something like an olive oil, I'm sure you know, is liquid at room temperature, okay, as are the polyunsaturated oils. If you put your saturated oils or fats in the fridge, they will remain solid. They were solid at room temperature. If you put your monounsaturated fats in the fridge, like olive oil, they will become solid. And if any of you have put olive oil in the fridge, you know that that's true. It becomes solid. Your polyunsaturated fats and oils will remain liquid in the fridge. So that's kind of how you know the degree of which the fat you're talking about or using is saturated, monounsaturated, or polyunsaturated. Okay? So what are some of these polyunsaturated oils that I'm talking about? Well, I'm talking about flaxseed oil, hemp seed oil, sesame seed oil. You can get walnut oil. There's many, many different types of oils out there, and they each have their own positives in respect to their micro and macronutrient breakdown, slightly different degrees of fats, slightly different vitamins in there, and I feel they all have benefits. If it's an option, I always recommend having quite a variety on hand so you can kind of mix it up and get different sources. But here's the catch about the polyunsaturated. You want to ensure that you're using them cold. So you do not want to do any sort of cooking with these ones that I've just named. Okay? They are polyunsaturated, which means they are not heat stable. They're very unstable. So this would be perfect for drizzling on salads, for example. That's how you want to use these oils. In a smoothie in the morning when all the ingredients are cold. That's where you want to really zero in on these types of fats. You'll notice that I did not include canola oils or some, store-bought vegetable oils on this list, and that's a really very important point I want to make. I have not included them because I do not feel they are healthy or that they have a place in a sound nutrition plan. They're highly processed, they are deodorized, they're full of chemicals, they've been treated with very high heat, so even though you might have heard canola oil is high in omega-6 fats, they have been removed and are now toxic because of all the processing that's gone through them. It's a pretty passionate topic of mine, and I wish I had a little bit more time, but I want you to maybe even jot it down as a takeaway. A quick internet search about the processing of canola oil will explain it all to you, and you won't want to consume it again. So stay away from these ones in the grocery store. Also be really aware of the packaged food you're buying, because it will often promote it as being canola oil based as a good thing. However, you know now different. You know the truth. So stay away from those canola and vegetable oils, which are largely soy, highly genetically modified. That's why they're able to offer them cheaper than a high-quality oil. So once again, with many of these foods, it really is worth paying the extra for the quality. Let's move on. We're still on some fats. There's a couple more I want to cover. And you'll see it here on the list. It's butter. Yes, I am including butter on the superfoods list. Now, I really need to emphasize, of course, that everything in moderation. There is too much of a good thing with all of these things. But like I mentioned before, if you're buying a really good quality butter from a grass-fed source, you are getting vitamins A, D, E, and K. You're getting CLA. You are getting those omega-3s in there. Okay, so an absolute high-quality food. We know that some foods we're going to talk about a little later, when you talk about the vegetables, the orange vegetables, your green vegetables that are high in these fat-soluble vitamins, the foods themselves don't have fat in them. So to increase absorption of these fat-soluble vitamins, you actually have to add some fat. So by adding a little bit of high-quality butter onto, a nice steaming of spinach or kale or whatever you want to be eating, you're increasing your body's ability to use those nutrients. And like I said before, the digestion, absorption is really dependent on what your body's getting out of these foods. So do yourself a favor, increase the absorption of these fat-soluble vitamins, and add a little bit of high-quality fat to them. Okay? I also wanted to mention ghee, which is clarified butter. So you can see it's very yellow, like that picture demonstrates in the top right-hand corner. You can buy it in health food stores now, which it's very expensive. I found it's worthwhile to seek out an Indian store in your area where you can probably buy it a lot less expensive. The beauty here is that it has the dairy removed, so it doesn't go rancid. You can actually keep it out on the counter. You can cook with it at very high temperatures. So it absolutely is worthwhile to have some on hand. I regularly use it for sautéing. I use it in recipes, like muffin recipes, for example. It works great. It is a stronger taste, so it might be one to get used to, but it really is worth mentioning. Now, where else do we find fats in our foods? Well, one major source is in our nuts and seeds. Now, this is an area I find fitness does really well, in that we're usually very high consumers of nuts and seeds. I think there's a little bit too much weight on the almonds. There's a lot of almonds being eaten out there, but there are other nuts and seeds that have incredible properties. So I've listed a few here. So we have Brazil nuts, one of my favorites. Those are those really, really big ones. But one Brazil nut has over 100% of your daily requirement of selenium, and that's a huge boost to your immune system. So really, really great to consume. Like I said, one. So even if you, in your mix, have one or two Brazil nuts, you've got your selenium covered, which is pretty incredible. Another favorite of mine, pumpkin seeds. So nice and high in manganese, very much known to be protective of prostate. We have sesame seeds, very high in vitamin E and calcium, so there's lots of ways to get your calcium outside of dairy. We have our walnuts, of course, that are high in omega-3 and vitamin E. Almonds are in there, of course. They have the vitamin E. They have monounsaturated fats. So lots to consider. There's no bad nut out there. I love macadamia nuts. So they all have a virtue to them that makes them a little bit special than the others. So my recommendation here, one thing to keep in mind, of course, is as good and nutritious as nuts and seeds may be, we do have to be sensitive to the fact that they're very calorically dense. So they are very high in calories. So as I've mentioned before, there is too much of a good thing. So you want to be going for about a maximum, about a handful serving of fats, being nuts and seeds per day. So different ways you can get that is you can pre-mix your nuts. So you can get a mix going. You can go buy all your nuts, mix them up. So you have your Brazil, your pumpkin seeds, your sunflower seeds, your favorite nuts in there. Mix them all up. Put them in, pre-measured little Tupperwares, and you have a great ready-to-go snack. My other favorite is actually I grind them all up. So once every couple of weeks, I will put a mix of all these nuts and seeds, and I'll actually put flax in there. I'll put hemp seeds in there. I got my chia in there. I put them all through my grinder so they become almost like a flour, and I use that flour for sprinkling on salads. I use it in muffin recipes, all kinds of baking. It's basically sprinkle on anything. I'll throw it right into my shakes. I make a protein waffle. I'll put it in there. So very convenient to have on hand and very, very useful. So that would be kind of my trick with the nuts and seeds. So we're about halfway through our call already, and I definitely have some more slides to go. So we're going to keep rolling here. So next up, I have green drinks. So these would include things like wheatgrass and barley grass, which is otherwise known as green magma. And we've probably all seen these. They tend to be offered as samples in many conferences, and that's a good thing. The common thread with all of these types of green drinks is their high level of chlorophyll. And that is the life of plants, right? That's what they allows them to have the nutrients. It's what allows them to grow. They get it from the sun. So that is what is so great about these green drinks. They are very alkalizing for the body. So we spoke earlier in the call about the fact that we're often in a state of inflammation, systemic inflammation in our body. However, we want to be in a more anti-inflammatory state. Inflammation and acidity go hand in hand. So many of the things that cause the body to be acidic will also cause it to be inflamed. So we are constantly trying to find ways in which we can decrease inflammation. And of course, the opposite of acid is alkaline. So we want to alkalize the body. What's great about these green drinks is that they help alkalize the body. Okay? Also very high in antioxidants. And as we know, oxidation causes damage in the body. So these are all kind of anti-damage nutrients, if you want to call them that help both alkalize and reduce inflammation in the body. So one way to take these, of course, some people are actually a little bit sensitive to some of these drinks. They actually make them a little bit nauseous, particularly wheatgrass. They're not accustomed to it. So if not first thing in the morning, I actually really love including them in a post-workout shake. And the reason being, of course, is that as great as working out can be on our bodies, it can also put our bodies into an acid state. So by getting in some protein, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well, and getting in some alkalizing nutrients like a green drink powder, you're helping reduce that inflammation and acidity buildup from the workout itself. So very good timing in that respect. But ultimately, there is no bad time to have a green drink. Other ones, sea vegetables that you'll find often in powdered form, and they're often included in these green drink formulations, are your spirulina and your chlorella. Okay, and I think everyone's heard of these. I find them to be very, very commonly known in general populations, but they are in fact superfoods, and I feel they're very much worth mentioning here. Spirulina, very actually high in protein, beta-carotene, fatty acids, and it's also an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. So those words, they keep coming up because they're so vital. So you'll see that as a common thread through many of the foods I've put on this list today. Chlorella binds with heavy metals, so it's actually helpful for detoxifying the body from aluminum. If we use a lot of aluminum, or if we live in an area, we pretty much all do, where toxins run rampant, this helps carry them out of the body. Also worth mentioning, of course, that it's an omega-3 source. Okay? So good ones to include. Now, it is, of course, very challenging to go get your own spirulina, right? You're not going to go hunting for it in the waters. So this is one where you really do have to buy it in powdered form. So the question is, well, is it then a supplement or is it a food? You know what? You can debate that either way, but the value of it was so important that it was worth putting on this list here. Next up, we're getting into some protein sources here, and the first up are eggs. Eggs, I don't think in the fitness industry they've received this bad rap, but there's certainly, and I still run into people who have been told that we really shouldn't be consuming very many eggs because they increase cholesterol. Okay? We know that there's twofold to that argument. One is that the food we eat largely doesn't have a massive effect on the cholesterol levels in our blood. So that's one thing to keep in mind, because the liver produces it and will likely balance out with what we eat. The second point, of course, is, well, how important is that overall cholesterol level? Pretty big topic. I do a whole presentation on it, so if that's something you want to hear more about, send in your feedback. We can maybe do another webinar specifically on cholesterol levels and saturated fat. I got a good chunk of time to talk to you about that. But eggs, I think, are a great superfood. The reason being, of course, is that they are a super source of protein. They are a super source of B2, of B12, of selenium, and choline, which is a little bit less known, I find, but very important for cardiovascular health and brain functioning. Now, here is the catch, and this is one that I feel the fitness industry has fallen victim to a little bit, is that those nutrients that I just mentioned outside of protein are found in the yolk. So I know I was totally guilty of this. Early in my days in the fitness industry, when I was an athlete, where I wanted to be really, really lean, I still want to be lean, but I understood at that point that I only needed the whites, that the yolks had lots of fat in it, the yolks were no good. So I would go and cook my egg whites. I would even buy those cartons of pasteurized egg whites, and I'd say, yeah, I'm getting my protein. And I was getting my protein, but I was missing out on so much more, and that is what I just mentioned, the B12, the B2, the selenium, the choline, very healthy fats. So you definitely want to include the yolks here. And please don't buy the pasteurized egg whites, because all the good stuff's been taken out of them. They've been pasteurized, which means they've been heated to very high temperatures. So we've killed off the natural goodness in the eggs. Now, I do want to emphasize that the quality of your eggs makes a huge difference. If you are buying a free-range and organic egg, that means the chickens were naturally able to peck and eat what they're meant to, which are, they're foragers, so they'll eat worms, they'll eat little stuff on the ground. That's what they're meant to eat. If they're not from that environment and not organic, where they're from cages, we know they're once again being fed foods that are not of high quality, that are meant to fatten them up, produce as many eggs as possible in as little time. So the quality is very different. You will even notice if you crack a regular just consumer egg, a low quality egg versus a high quality egg, you'll notice the color of the yolk is quite dramatically different. The yolks of the cheap, $2.99 eggs that you get on sale that are from farmed animals are actually very pale, the yolks, yellow, even lighter, whereas you should see a nice, rich, orangey kind of color from these higher quality eggs. And I always make the joke that once you start buying organic eggs at, $6.29 a dozen, it's going to hurt a lot more to throw out the yolk. So definitely, if you're spending that money on these high-quality eggs, don't throw away the yolk. It's a waste of money and a waste of incredibly high-quality nutrients. But I do absolutely feel that eggs have a great place in the diet, in a really sound nutrition plan. Okay. Now the next topic here is, you can see it, to meat or not. Now, I don't want to discuss the virtues and the reasons why someone would eat meat or not for just personal reasons, but I'm simply here to discuss the nutritional value of meat. And I do feel that high-quality meat has a place in a high-quality nutrition plan. Now, is that true of conventional store-bought meat? Absolutely not. In fact, I think we should minimize our consumption of regular, non-organic, properly raised and fed meat. Okay? So the differences being, again, we know there's hormones in meat. We know there are antibiotics in meat. We know that they are being fed genetically modified foods, very high in corn and soy. The reason being is that they're cheap and they fatten up the animal very quickly. So the nutrient density of those types of meats is actually much lower. When we allow cattle to feed and eat the grass, when poultry is free range, when they're eating what they are meant historically to eat, the nutritional value of these foods dramatically changes. So we see the increase in omega-3. We see a higher nutrient density because they did not get fat so quickly. So within 2 ounces of meat, you will get many more nutrients, which means you don't have to eat as much. So although it's more expensive, you should be satisfied with less of the meat. Okay? So if you're a high consumer of meat and if it's a non-organic source, I definitely think it's worthwhile to put a goal in place of switching that ratio, so decreasing the amount of conventional meat being consumed and increasing the high-quality organic. I'm in Montreal and I found a great organic farmer here. They even deliver to the door, visited, so you know they're high quality, you see what's being fed. So you want to have confidence and know where your animal products are coming from. Whether you eat it or not is a personal decision, okay, so that's a little bit beyond the scope once again, but if meat is on the plate, these are the things you want to keep in mind. Next up, and it definitely relates into the animal products we just discussed, but I wanted to section it off as its own category, and that is of collagen. So this is one I feel that deserves a lot more attention than it's necessarily getting, because we are very much a society now that's obsessed with muscle meat. So we're told to buy lean ground beef. We buy pork tenderloin. We buy chicken breast because it's lower in fat, right? Higher in protein. We've become quite consumed with buying this muscle meat. But what's interesting to note is that if you go back in history, this was actually the meat that was consumed last, and in some cases given away to the dogs. So this was the lowest quality of byproduct of the animal kill that there was. Now, why is that? Well, when we talk about the other parts of the animal, such as brain, the organs, the eyeball, the adrenal glands, those were the prized parts of the animals because they're much richer in nutrients. They are much higher in the amino acid called glycine. And that is really critical to overall health. Methionine, which is high in muscle meat, is actually known to be detrimental in too high a dose. Okay? So why am I talking about this? Because I do want to draw attention to it that if your stomach allows you, we really do want to be making an effort to be consuming these often neglected parts of the animal. And this is always kind of a nice conversation I like to have with those who are very strong proponents of the paleo way of eating. And I say, okay, are you really eating like your ancestors did? Are you eating these prized parts of the animals? I remember actually being on vacation in Greece, and we had a guide with us, and we ordered a big fish. And we all went for the nice, meaty parts of the fish. And the eyeball was served with this big with this big fish, and everyone just never even went close to the eyeball. And the guide was looking around at us like we were crazy, and he was kind of waiting, like, who's going to take it? Like, who's going to get this eyeball? And we all said, no, we don't want it. And he went ahead, of course, and he pulled that eyeball out, and it was nice and goopy, and he was just in his glory because it was so rare to be able to get that. And I personally I don't think I'm ever going to be able to eat an eyeball just as a personal experience. But it does go to show, of course, that the parts that we're neglecting are really full of nutrients. Now, what are some ways around this? You might notice at the top right-hand corner, I have some pictures of bones in there. And inside the bones is marrow. And marrow is very, very high in collagen. There are some great recipes for roasting bones and eating the marrow. There's also other ways. So like I mentioned before, if you find a great organic farmer, you can usually buy their soup bones very inexpensively. You can take these bones and make your own soup stock. It actually gets very gelatinous, so it's high in gelatin. You'll actually see it form at the top. And then you can make it whatever you want it to be. You can make it a vegetable soup, a chicken soup. But by using the bones and the collagen in them, you're getting a nice high-quality meal right there. So that is, I think, one of the easiest ways to get your collagen and therefore your amino acid glycine up nice and high. The other way to do it is through supplementation. So you'll notice on the left-hand side, I have a little picture of gelatin. Okay, I'll skip that there. And with that, with the gelatin, you can buy it as such. Sorry, there we go. And it's very important, once again, to get a grass-fed source. You can buy it almost anywhere, but you do want to get a high-quality source. So with this one here, which is Great Lakes Gelatin, unfortunately, I have not found anywhere in Canada where you can buy it in a store. However, you can order it online. What you can do with that is you can use it in many different types. You can use it in smoothies. You can use it in pancakes. You can put it in muffins. You can make your own Jell-O, delicious Jell-O with some organic juices in the gelatin. It's great. I have 2 young kids. They think they're eating Jell-O. I'm super happy because they're getting all kinds of gelatin in there. And you can, of course, eat the animal products, as I mentioned, but these supplements can actually be really, really handy. You can mix it right in water and just drink it, okay? So this is one that I'm pretty passionate about, that I really feel we're going to be hearing more and more about. Definitely top of the list, okay? So if the glycine stores are low, it increases our body's need for B12, for folate, for choline, and as I mentioned, it drains the glycine by eating too much of this muscle meat, okay? There's also many, many studies, if you want to start investigating it. There are many more being done, but they've already started showing that by increasing our intake of glycine, we're increasing our protection from diabetes, cancer, cholesterol, ulcers, heart disease, amongst others. So some really interesting science coming out here, and like I said, I think we're going to be hearing only more and more about this one. So if organ meats are an issue, obviously, I presented some other options for you. If you're really open to eating those types of foods, then of course you got to get the organic sources. If you're eating something like a liver, please note that that's where toxins are stored, right? So if there's one meat that should be organic above all else, it would be your livers. But go ahead and explore those things. If you're open to it, you're definitely going to benefit from them. All right. Now, what about alternative protein sources? There are some, and I think they're worth mentioning, because some people do not eat meat or they want to consume less of it, so they're looking for alternatives. So here's where we see things like beans and lentils, potentially vegan replacements such as pea protein, hemp and brown rice protein, as well as sea vegetables. So a lot of the seaweeds are actually complete amino acid sources and really a decent amount of protein in them. So I always recommend sea vegetables, whether someone is vegan, vegetarian, or a full-fledged meat eater. Beans, we know, full of fiber, blood sugar regulation, all kinds of nutrients in them. Not everyone can digest them as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not saying this is appropriate for everyone. However, definitely worth exploring, despite some things we hear about them containing anti-nutrients for the body. I'm not wholeheartedly behind that. I think there's definitely value to including these foods in the diet, especially if the body tolerates them well. What will help the body tolerate them better is to soak them. So as opposed to just buying right out of a can or just using them immediately right into a soup, for example, if you pre-soak your lentils and beans, you will help reduce those nutrient blocks on them. Your body will benefit and be able to absorb and utilize the nutrients in them better. So that's definitely a great option to go with. In terms of the sea vegetables, they are widely available at organic or health food stores. They often come dry, so they can be included in soups. You can make them into part of a stir fry. So there are many ways to use them as well. I think we all know the great example of nori being sushi, so another great reason to eat sushi. But definitely worth increasing. And that's one of the ones I feel is kind of a hidden treasure, sea vegetables. We don't talk about them enough, and they really are incredible sources in our diet. Whey protein is there. Once again, the question is it a supplement? Is it a food? I'm going to let you debate that in your own mind, but I want to mention it because it does serve a purpose. You'll note that the picture here indicates that it's New Zealand protein. And that was done on purpose, is because there are a lot of low-quality proteins out there. When you're buying a protein, you want to look for it being ideally from a grass-fed cow, and New Zealand protein would indicate that it has not been given antibiotics. Okay, so you want to make sure that this is not a hormone antibiotic-filled product. And once again, we're left with that notion that you typically pay for what you get. So by buying a higher quality protein, yes, you'll pay a little bit more, but I do wholeheartedly believe that it is worth the effort. Now, one reason I couldn't ignore protein powder is because it's just so darn convenient. You are likely all in jobs where you have to move quickly from one client to the next, from one task to the next, and something can be said for being able to get a high amount of nutrients in a really short period of time. The danger I find in using whey proteins is that I've encountered some people who use them 3 times a day. They're taking multiple scoops of protein a day. It's become their main source of protein. Now that's where I feel it's gone over the line. So we want to use it, I would say, maximum once a day or as needed. Once we start relying upon protein as a main part of our protein intake, I think we need to branch out and spend that effort looking at other means of getting protein in. Okay? We do know that protein helps us stay full, retain muscle mass. I don't usually have to talk about the attributes of protein a whole lot with the fitness industry. It's very well understood. But theanine, remember, is a very important master antioxidant, which is very high in these protein powders. So that of itself is one major reason why protein is on the list. Okay? So once again, you're looking for a pure protein that doesn't contain a lot of fillers. So you want to make sure that it doesn't have soy, corn, GMO ingredients. Be aware of the sweeteners. A lot of protein powders are full of sucralose and aspartame. That's what gives them those crazy flavors that they're able to promote. That's usually a red flag. We don't want to consume chemicals along with it. We're looking for as pure a product as possible. What are some things to keep in mind with the protein? Okay. Yeah, we're running somewhat close to our 1 hour, but I definitely want to go through a few more with you. The next one up is apple cider vinegar. So easy to buy, inexpensive, and yet so packed full of nutrients. We're still exploring, and there's still some different ideologies out there about how many vitamins and nutrients are in apple cider vinegar, but whether it's 20, whether it's 50, we know it's very high in nutrients, such as, it's not a complete list, but things like potassium, phosphorus, pectin. So we have some minerals, enzymes, of course, that help digestion, fiber sources, known to improve insulin sensitivity. Now, what we want to keep in mind when we're buying vinegars, particularly apple cider vinegar, is that we're buying an unpasteurized form. So I did put up a brand here that I really enjoy because it's unpasteurized and it has the mother in it. The mother is that stuff that looks kind of goopy and floating around at the bottom. You want that to be there. You don't want it to be pasteurized because, again, pasteurization means that it was heated to very high temperatures, which would ultimately kill off many of these nutrients that we're promoting in it. So you want to buy, and you see it here, it says raw and unfiltered. That's absolutely 100% what you're going for. So although you can find some that look nice and clear and there's nothing in them, those are actually the ones that you want to stay away from. Okay? These are great to take shots of. Okay? You just want to do a little shooter of cider vinegar in salad dressings. There's all kinds of ways to use it. That can go right into a shake. You can add it to juicing if you do juicing. So there's really unlimited amounts of ways you can get apple cider vinegar into your diet. Now, what's next? We have something sweet. So a little sweet tooth myself, I'm not going to lie. But what I try to do is incorporate these high nutrient value sweeteners when I do use them. And so my two best examples of that are blackstrap molasses. So it does need to say blackstrap on it. So the little carton with the grandma on it's not quite the same thing. and raw unfiltered honey. So once again, we're trying to get unprocessed sources here. So blackstrap molasses actually is full of nutrients. It's got potassium and calcium, magnesium and manganese and iron, complete array of B vitamins as well as copper. So who knew something sweet could have so much goodness to it? Okay, so once again, I widely use it drizzled on top of like a protein or a waffle recipe that I like to make. It goes into muffins. You can actually make salad dressings with a little bit of molasses in it. It gives it a nice kick, some sauces. So it's quite easy to incorporate molasses, and we know it's very easy to incorporate honey. So once again, most of the honey we buy is pasteurized, right? It's very clear. So you want to try to go for the raw honey. You'll actually see little bits of stuff in there, right, from the natural, the way the bees made it, unfiltered. And there, once again, we're talking about micronutrients full of them. So definitely ones to include and to feel good about, not guilty. Okay. Next up, we have brewer's yeast, also sometimes referred to as nutritional yeast. This is an inactive yeast, so you can't actually put this in breads to make them rise. But the beauty of it is that it actually has a full array of amino acids, which is rare to find, and it's packed full of B12 and chromium. And chromium, of course, we know helps control blood sugar levels, linked into reduced cravings, and we tend to burn through it quite quickly when we exercise at high intensities for an extended period of time. So really, really a good one to have on hand. Now, if you're not familiar with brewer's yeast, it does have a little bit of a cheesy taste to it. So you do have to be a little bit careful where you put it. And if you've made the mistake that I've made, I've used it too liberally, and then it's not such a great tasting addition to your food. So definitely experiment with the volume you use. It can be sprinkled on vegetables. So for example, if you have some cauliflower that you've steamed up, you can sprinkle it on top. It almost tastes like a cheesy cauliflower and broccoli. It can be put into some baking in lower quantities. Again, too much, you're going to taste it. Sprinkling it, again, is my preferred method of use for brewer's yeast. Okay? Once again, very easy to find. So I've included an example of a company that's widely available across Canada. So it can be found, if not in your regular grocery store, in any health food store, very easy to find. Getting towards the end of the list, but really important to mention that fermented foods have a place in everyone's diet. So they are healthy bacteria. So this is a natural form of probiotics, as opposed to the yogurts that we hear a lot about today that have been pasteurized to high heaven. They do not have nearly the same quality as a naturally fermented foods. So these are ones you want to look for and incorporate. Things like sauerkraut, miso, so an Asian cuisine, so fermented soybeans, tempeh as well, soy sauce. Again, I'm not a huge promoter of eating soy foods unless they're in the fermented state. And these examples are all fermented examples of soy foods. And then I say, yes, they absolutely have a place in our diet. Full spectrum of B vitamins, B12, once again, a tough one to get, especially if we're not consuming many animal products. So this is where you want to get them. And as I mentioned, complete amino acid profile here. So absolutely fantastic additions. There are ways to ferment your own food. They can also be purchased, of course, like everything else I've mentioned, in a high-quality health food store. Pickles are also an example. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that when we buy things like pickles in the regular grocery store, they're often done through a vinegar fermentation now, so that speeds up the process. But it doesn't allow for the same level of probiotics and healthy bacteria. So you do want to go with a more traditionally fermented food or source. Antioxidants. I put this one up here for a very specific reason. I think we've all heard that antioxidants are good for us. There is a way to measure how much antioxidants are within a food. It's called the ORAC scale, so oxygen radical absorption capacity. So that is a food's ability to fight off oxidation. So that's a good thing for our body. And the reason I put it up here is because the number one thing on the list is, of course, unprocessed cocoa powder. So in real life form, that would be your high percentage cocoa chocolate. So there is a place for chocolate in the diet. In fact, there's a very healthy place for it. And that's just worth celebrating as its own slide. So if you are consuming some chocolate, which again I feel has a place for everyone, you want to be looking for 70% or higher percentage of cocoa in there. So you want that higher level, that higher percentage. Once you start getting into lower percentages and even into the milk chocolates, as we know, the antioxidant level goes down dramatically and the sugar level goes up dramatically. So, I'm not saying run out and get yourself an Aero bar. I'm saying looking for some good quality, high percentage chocolate. So, yay, let's celebrate that one. Okay. Last but not least, what I'd like to do is run through some spices. And there's just so much to be said about spices. And they're often neglected as little afterthoughts. But if we regularly make an effort to include spices in all of our meals and in our snacks, we're doing ourselves a huge favor. So some of my favorites, and they all kind of fall into a very similar category here, are cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg. So cinnamon gets quite a bit of attention to moderate blood sugar. It's full of antioxidants, which I know I've mentioned a lot. Ginger being known as the universal remedy. So it has been used historically, traditionally, for many, many different reasons. Morning sickness, nausea, and increasing circulation as an immune system booster. We know cloves and nutmeg are antiseptic, antiviral. What I love is I buy a nice high-quality mouthwash, actually, that has cloves and nutmegs in it because it helps decrease the chance of cancer. It helps keep our mouth clean. These are really easy spices to use in cooking and baking. So you want to use, essentially, as much of them as you can. If you are a coffee drinker, one of my preferred methods is that I pre-mix these spices and I keep them in a shaker dried by my coffee machine. And I actually sprinkle them into my coffee every day, knowing that I'm giving myself a little bit of a nutrient and antioxidant kick in the morning. Okay. Others that you've probably heard about that are fantastic are turmeric. We know it's incredibly anti-inflammatory. It actually is sold as a high-dose supplement, so it goes to show you there. We have oregano and its oil, which definitely use, if not all the time, when you're feeling the onset of a virus come on, drop some oregano oil, or my favorite trick is to steam with oregano oil. So boil some water, drop some oregano oil in there, tent your head over the steam, inhale deeply through your nose and your mouth. You'll feel it going right into the passages. It works wonders. Okay, also worth mentioning are rosemary, sage, pepper. They all, again, have fairly unique qualities that make them special, but in your cooking, use them liberally, as much as you can, and although they're smaller in their quantities, of course, by using them regularly, even growing your own herb garden, you're increasing the nutrient density of your food quite dramatically. Okay? So I have us here at 1:58. Which means that I'd like to allow for a few minutes for questions. So if we can open up the lines for questions, that would be fantastic. I will pause my screen. I don't see any questions here
Kirstin,
on the board.
Sorry, Kirstin, I've assigned 3 questions to you. You should be able to see them in your GoToWebinar screen. If you can, I can just read them to you if you'd like.
You know what? I'm clicking on it to see it, and it keeps minimizing on me. So
oh, goodness. Okay, yeah. Do you want me to just read you the questions?
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to go.
All right, so our first question is wild salmon clearly labeled and accessible?
Yes, it absolutely is. It is, and if you're not sure, if you're in the fish compartment of your grocery store, you can ask them. But in my experience, it's very easy to see. You want to, it will say wild salmon.
Okay, awesome. The next one says, if you regularly eat flax, is flax oil still a good addition to your diet, or should you focus on other oils?
Well, the vitamin E is going to be there regardless. If you do consume a lot of flax and you know that it's a regular part, then I would go for the variety. So I would choose a type of oil that maybe you do not consume as much of to get, again, that variety of nutrients.
Perfect. The last question that I have is, I found when I use protein powder, I retained a lot of water. Is this a common side effects?
I don't know if I've definitely heard it before. I don't know so much common, but definitely not uncommon, so somewhere in the middle. Again, not everyone, and that might be a little bit of a lactose intolerance, right, because we're definitely getting that in the whey protein. So if you notice that, it would be interesting to try a different source of protein. So there are some great vegan proteins out there, so that are made from the pea and the hemp and the rice proteins. So I would definitely try an alternate source of protein to see if you have the same reaction. Sometimes people actually feel like a bloating because they're consuming it in water and a large amount of it at one time. So there's a little bit of the water bloat. It could be a sensitivity to the lactose in the whey. So for those two reasons, try a different source to see if that kind of rectifies it if you feel like you want to have the convenience of using a protein powder.
Perfect. We had 3 more pop up.
Does that answer the question?
It answered for me, yes. I haven't gotten feedback, but I'll let you know. We did get 3 more questions pop up, so we'll just go through these quickly, and then I believe we're at a time. So, does ground flax become toxic if not used quickly or stored properly?
Yes, that's a great question, and absolutely. So if you're pre-grinding it, you 100% want to keep it in the fridge or the freezer because air will affect it. So you want to keep it airtight and cool. So freezer would be best. It will last a little bit longer. In the fridge, I would say up to about 2 weeks in an airtight container. But yeah, leaving it out at room temperature is not the best bet.
Perfect. More DHA or EPA for mood swings?
Would they be, in terms of the balance, well, you definitely want to get both. It's difficult to isolate off one from the other. So both, I haven't seen studies that have separated them in terms of their effect on that. So definitely consuming a balanced either food source or supplement source of the two.
Awesome. And our last one is, does nutritional yeast have a shelf life?
That's a great question. It's going to be longer than something like flax, that's for sure. You should be, I'm trying to think about my container right now. I go through it fairly quickly, so I hadn't noticed it. But it should be, because you're going to be buying it in a package, right? It comes usually in like a shaker bottle, which I find very convenient, or you can buy it in a package. So respect the date of expiration on it. And like anything else, by keeping it in a cool environment, you're helping yourself. So I don't keep mine actually in the freezer, but like I said, I go through it fairly quickly, so it's kind of been a non-issue. But yeah, when in doubt, or if you don't use it that rapidly, keep it in a cool environment for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kirstin. We've had lots of great feedback on the webinar already. As Kirstin said, if you guys do have any other feedback or anything, please do send it in. We'd love to hear back from you guys. And otherwise, that's all we have.